Kenya's cabinet has now adopted the Africa Continental Free Trade Treaty for ratification by the National Assembly. Now, the Continental Trade Treaty will come into effect when it's ratified by 22 countries. The cabinet urged the private sector to take advantage of the business opportunities presented by the treaty and extend Kenya's foothold across the continent. President Uhuru Kenyatta chaired the cabinet's first meeting since he formed the government 4 months ago. The Free Trade Treaty will establish a single liberalized market. It's also expected to spur industrialization, infrastructure development, economic diversity and trade across the continent. The trade deal also binds state parties to objectives such as the progressive elimination of tariffs and non-tariff barriers to trade. Well, it is indeed this Continental Free Trade Area. It is the most ambitious effort yet to free up trade flows within the African continent. But it's far from a done deal. In fact, the deal needs to be approved at country level by national legislators, and protectionist instincts there could easily derail it. 44 countries signed the treaty earlier in March, but Nigeria and South Africa, the continent's two largest economies, weren't among them. As CGTN's Ramah Nyang reports, there are even more hurdles to overcome.
So then, the Continental Free Trade Area, the CFTA as it's more commonly known, has been 3 years in the making. Countries have been sitting down and trying to negotiate on exactly what it is they're trying to achieve. Now, on paper, it's a relatively simple but difficult to implement idea. The argument that's being made by some parties like the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa is that if African countries can remove the 6% import tariffs that they have on goods moving within their own borders, you could see trade flow move up by about 50%, perhaps even more. Now, if you remove non-tariff barriers on top of that, you're looking at a 100% plus increase in trade flow within the African continent. And that's a pretty big deal because within Africa as a whole, as a percentage of its total trade, only about 20% or so happens within the African continent itself. A lot of opportunity there, plenty of upside, but getting to it is a whole different matter. Remember, the two largest economies on the continent, Nigeria and South Africa, they did not sign this deal at all. And at this point, it's not clear if Nigeria and South Africa will actually do so. That said, most of the countries that did refuse to sign, essentially, the CFTA are located within the Southern African Development Community. Will they sign on at some point in the future? We'll have to wait and see. But for now, there is a critical mass of about 44 countries that have signed on to the deal. 22 are needed to ratify it for it to actually come into force. That has to go to individual national assemblies, and hopefully it'll happen in the next 180 days. So by the time the next AU summit does roll around, we should at least have the CFTA active and in force. So one criticism that's usually leveled against the African Union is that there's a lot of talk but very little action, and past deals do provide some proof of that. The Yamoussoukro decision in 1999 to actually open up the continental airspace to treat it as one single air transport market, that's been dead for a really, really long time. And now you're seeing countries in individual regional economic communities actually trying to pick up where Yamoussoukro left off. So the East African Community, for example, is working on setting up a single air transport market. And that essentially creates this interesting dichotomy of a two-speed Africa where some regions are moving much faster than others. But back to the core issue, the CFTA. Will it be in force by the end of the year? That really is the trillion-dollar question. From Abidjan in Côte d'Ivoire, I'm Ramah Nyang.
Well, for more insights on this agreement, we have in studio with us David Owiro, an independent analyst of economic and political affairs in Africa. David, always a pleasure to have you with us. Now, indeed, this free trade area has been in talks, or the deal at least, for a number of years. The reality may still be a little far away, but just talk us through how significant it is and how it could potentially really transform the continent.
Yes, you're right. I mean, the Continental Free Trade Area is something that has been a major flagship project for the African Union. It's one of the goals in the Africa's Agenda 2063. And the potential for this trade deal is that currently Africa's intra-African trade stands at about 18%. And basically manufacturing, which is where most of the jobs come from, nationally stands at about 10% for African countries. what this trade deal, the potential for this trade deal is, it might move this to over 50%, basically transforming the manufacturing sector. And so with a huge population, youthful population that we have in Africa, the job growth that Africa has been keen for might actually be driven by this.
Might materialize eventually.
Yeah.
But indeed, there's many obstacles before we get to that point, a number of challenges concerning perhaps that Nigeria and South Africa have not signed on as yet. In your way, what could stand in the way of this becoming a reality?
I think their concerns are valid. A lot of most countries, if you read the analysis and the reports coming out, is that they are afraid of African nations coming in to take over domestic industries. So basically, theirs is an infant industry argument. And so if you look at a country such as Nigeria, the big local-owned, local-grown multinationals have come out of a protectionist regime. And so I think it's just a word of caution. But at the same time, for me, I'm going to be optimistic about this, because what was signed is a framework agreement. So basically, people agreeing to a process to achieve a certain outcome. And through the process, you'll have many negotiation rounds, as with all kinds of trade negotiations. And so these negotiations basically allow for individual member countries to define the extent of trade liberation that they would want to go, and through a negotiated process, hopefully arrive at a win-win situation. So it's not all gloom, given that they are yet to, or they have outrightly held out. I think we just have to wait and see how the process unfolds.
And of course, in these areas of regional partnerships, it's very possible for countries to disagree. I mean, it's even something like the East African Community will have moments of disagreement. In your view, though, what will it take to ensure this Continental Free Trade Area is a success?
I think you've mentioned the East African Community. One major shortcoming has been that these regional trade blocs have not gone to the public. So in terms of seeking to increase public awareness, especially of their own domestic populations that are affected by this, there has been no awareness campaigns around the benefits of having a common trading bloc and so forth. And so one of the challenges would be for this new trade deal for the nations involved to basically have awareness creation programs so that people can know and identify with the benefits, as well as just seek out, with all trade deals actually, you have clauses which allow for dispute resolution and for airing or resolving whatever conflicts that arise. And that's not to say that conflicts will not arise. What is important is whether governments use actually the provisions that are within those trade deals to settle them. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for that analysis. That's David Owiro here in studio with us on that Continental Free Trade Area, an agreement that has the potential to truly transform the continent.